By the mid-20th century, a new India was born. The British moved out, and democracy moved in. India would now conduct its own affairs as an independent nation. Neighboring China also completed a radical change at the same time, as the communists had fully conquered the mainland. But the two neighbors would be quite distant. The two nations are separated by the imposing Himalayas, one of the world's most impenetrable mountain chains. As if the Himalayas weren't a great enough geographic barrier, the autonomous region of Tibet created extra buffer. But after gaining control of China, Mao Zedong intended to assert Chinese dominance across the Indo-Pacific region. One of his targets included the Buddhist nation of Tibet. Mao launched a brutal 9-year military campaign that ended Tibet's autonomy, and it remains a part of China to this day. Millions of Tibetans would not survive the conquest. The conflict forced many to cross the Himalayas and seek refuge in India. This included the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama was welcomed in India and granted refugee status, much to the dismay of the Politburo in Beijing. Once safe in India, the Dalai Lama was not afraid to detail the oppression of the Tibetan people and called for the restoration of Tibetan independence. The brutal conquest of Tibet soured India's opinion of China. Indians and Tibetans have deep historical and cultural ties, and the conquest of their neighbors did not sit well with the Indian public.
From the point of view of the Indian public, it has to be remembered that India has had long historical connections with Tibet. Cultural, economic, religious. And so whatever the Chinese were doing in Tibet, especially religious suppression, were issues that affected the Indian public.
India has a shared history with Tibet. For centuries, it was an autonomous and independent Tibet that shared a border with India, not China.
Tensions between the religious democracy and irreligious communist regime continued to decline. In addition to the invasion of Tibet, China and India disagreed on the actual borders of Tibet. This was not an issue in the past, but since Tibet was now a part of China, a new border dispute was born, a dispute that resulted in a military conflict. While the West and the Soviets were distracted with the Cuban Missile Crisis, Chairman Mao decided that this was the ideal time to seize control of the disputed territories. On the 20th of October, 1962, 80,000 troops of the People's Liberation Army advanced into the disputed territories. Indian soldiers were outnumbered by nearly 4-1. China's military proved too much for India, and the CCP quickly gained control of the disputed territory. But in a strange course of action, China voluntarily pulled their troops back. Beijing was concerned about its international reputation. In the preceding 10 years, China engaged in military action in Korea, the Taiwan Straits, Vietnam, and of course Tibet. China's decade of military expansionism gave it the reputation of a warmonger, and by attacking India, one of the leading nations of the non-aligned movement, China's international reputation was quite unfavorable. Even the Soviets were growing concerned with China's imperialistic actions. In order to save face, China completely withdrew from the disputed territories. While peace returned, the border dispute was never really settled. The relationship between India and China remained tense in the following decades. The disputed regions themselves provide little value. They are incredibly mountainous, have little to no economic benefit, and are sparsely populated. With so little strategic value, both sides agreed to treat the area as both man's land, and kept the region mostly demilitarized and calm. But the tranquility came to an end in the 2010s.
Chinese troops have set up loudspeakers that belt out Punjabi numbers at their forward posts. Let's take a look.
But the taunting would be replaced by physical conflict in the spring of 2020. China surprised India by deploying troops in previously demilitarized areas. India responded with troop deployments of their own. Skirmishes broke out in the following weeks, although these battles were fought with batons and rock throwing due to the no weapons agreement.
We will go back, but the point is the way you are hitting us. That's very wrong. Okay.
Nonetheless, both sides suffered a few casualties. These skirmishes occurred when India-Chinese relations were at an all-time high. which perplexed many geopolitical analysts as to why China would rehash an old border dispute, but new theories are starting to emerge. Dr. Tanvi Madan at the Brookings Institute offers one possible answer. Most geopolitical decisions are made to appease domestic political needs. This is applicable to all nations, including China. The CCP's leadership has received domestic criticism in the past few years, from pandemic mismanagement to a looming real estate crisis, to concerns if debts from the Belt and Road Initiative will ever be repaid. The Chinese public are starting to question if Xi Jinping is guiding the country in the right direction. By asserting Chinese power in the disputed territories, the CCP is able to offer some assurances of competence to the public. Additionally, China has adopted similar expansionist strategies in the South China Sea, which garnered little international pushback. If the CCP could get away with being aggressive in the South China Sea, they could probably do the same thing with the disputed territories in India. Jayadev Rande, president at the Center for China Analysis and Strategy, offers a more realpolitik motive for China's pursuit of the disputed territories. The crown jewel of China's Belt and Road Initiative is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, also known as CPEC. This $65 billion project has the potential to offer China a safer supply line to Middle East oil, as it would bypass the Malacca Strait choke point. But CPEC has many dilemmas, one being that it runs through another disputed territory between India and Pakistan. Should relations between India and Pakistan get hot, China would need to secure the safe passage of oil through CPEC. Not to mention that Pakistan has security issues of its own. By maintaining a stronger military presence in the disputed region with India, China is better positioned to keep the Arab oil flowing. No matter the reason for China's increased hostility towards India, the Indians have responded in turn. India is one of the most attractive export markets, as they recently overtook China to become the world's most populous nation. Additionally, India is forecasted to have one of the fastest growing economies this decade, and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is well aware of his country's market value, and he's not afraid to use it as leverage. In response to the CCP's aggression, Modi made it more difficult for Chinese tech companies to access the Indian market. A notable example includes the banning of TikTok and 200 other Chinese-made apps. Trade volume between the two giants is starting to decline, although part of the decline can be attributed to the overall decrease of China's manufacturing output. In any case, the renewed political and economic tensions between these two giants have come to fore. Leading Indian pundits are questioning if India should remain a part of BRICS. The core differences between India and China are easy to summarize. China envisions a unipolar Asia, with Beijing in control. India aspires to remain independent and unaligned, and does not want to be subject to any foreign rule whatsoever. Unless China pulls back, or India submits, tensions between these two giants are likely to remain for the foreseeable future. But India isn't the only major player in conflict with China. Across the Pacific lies another economic superpower with its own China problems. Click on the video card to watch the next segment in this series. If the video card isn't there, then become a patron to watch it now before everyone else without any ads. A big thank you to the patrons who make this channel possible.